The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. The immigration issue is all over Washington. In fact, there's a question about whether the Senate and the House might actually take up immigration reform this month in their short session before the midterm elections. Most people think that's highly unlikely. President Obama has said that he might issue an executive order to allow undocumented immigrants a chance to stay here, kind of the DREAM Act without the legislation. Highly controversial, and he's decided to postpone it until after the elections. To comment on these issues, I've invited my good friend Cesar del Aquila, the former chair of the Fairfax County Democratic Party. Cesar, welcome to
Glad to be here, Mark. Glad to be here.
We're going to talk about immigration in the next 3 segments, but before we get there,
yes,
how can you and I, Virginia residents, not comment on the only conviction
we can't.
of a Virginia governor in the history of Virginia?
Very sad.
People were
Very
saying
sad.
it was the largest and most important trial in Virginia history. Some say it's second only to the Aaron Burr treason trial, which was 200 years ago. Nevertheless, it's obviously big news. Now, Governor Bob McDonnell, former Governor Bob McDonnell, was offered a plea deal.
He was.
And the plea deal
early on,
yep. And it would not. His wife would have no charges, Maria McDonnell.
That's right.
And he had to plead guilty to one felony.
One count
of failure to disclose some of these loans.
Correct. A very, very minor.
Do we have any idea what kind of jail time he would have gotten had he accepted that?
I think it's like a speeding ticket, a little slap on the wrist,
so
pay
no
a fine,
jail time probably at all, maybe probation, something like that.
If that.
Instead, we were subjected to, or I guess for those of us who enjoy this kind of stuff, intrigued by, a trial whereby Bob McDonnell basically blamed everything on his wife.
Yeah.
It was all Marie McDonnell. She was, I believe one of the witnesses said, and this is a technical term, a quote, nutbag, unquote. That was one of the nicer things that was said about her in the trial. And I have no doubt Marie McDonnell has certain spending habits, and frankly, she's guilty too. She's guilty of 8 counts. But did it surprise you that Bob McDonnell, a man who has written about family values and about man's obligation to a woman, and women should stay in the home while the man works and takes care of them, did it surprise you that this family values guy went after his wife so viscerally at the trial and then still lost?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there, Mark, first of all. It's a sad time, I'm sure, for the family. We certainly want to, acknowledge that. But I think it comes back to your base question. I think he was in this mindset, in this echo chamber, where things made sense to him. And he was putting himself above everything else. How this affected him.
When he accepted the loans, or at the time of trial, or both?
I think from the time he took office, it was about his next step.
To become vice president of the United States. He was on Mitt Romney's short list.
Absolutely. I think that drove, and I don't know the man, I have no empirical data to support this. My gut tells me he wasn't thinking about his family at that point. He was thinking down the road, or he was thinking how these things might put him in a better position to advance his political career.
Now, one of the things that we find in politics, and as you know, I ran for Congress myself, one of the things that politicians are asked to do at all levels, state, federal, is to raise money. And speaking as someone who did it for a few months, it's a horrible, horrible thing to do.
Sure.
I hate doing it, I hate asking, and I think probably most politicians do. Arguably, Bob McDonnell and Maureen McDonnell did it because they were in heavy debt, whether through her spending habits or perhaps through his political needs. And it's actually easy to get money for a politician if you give something back.
You're talking the quid pro quo.
Well, exactly.
Okay. So, but it's not supposed to work that way, obviously. I think what happens to some people, when they start raising this money, by the way, it doesn't matter how big or small, or you just, in Virginia, just declare it. There's a nice couple little lines on your filing report. You just declare who gave you what, where, and when. That's it. Everything done.
Yeah, but that's the other thing about it is he got $177,000, which by political terms is actually considered small amount.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, and
these days.
Well, right.
These days.
A Rolex watch, money for his daughter, catering business. His wife got some fancy shoes. They got some golf trips. Under Virginia law, he could have just declared it.
Absolutely.
And nothing wrong with it.
Yes.
Except if he gives something back.
Correct. Correct. As full disclosure, you ran for office.
Right.
I wrote you a check.
Yes, you did.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you.
Oh, well, sure. Thank you for running.
That.
Thank you.
Although
But to the audience,
it was under $200, so we didn't have to actually.
But you should disclose everything. Is the point?
We probably did.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But the mistake I think was for some folks is the appearance, of someone giving.
So Johnny Williams had this health pill, supposedly touting the health benefits of a tobacco product, which is very hard to prove, let me tell you. It's a little counterintuitive that tobacco could be healthy.
Nicotine gives you jolts, but yeah.
So admittedly, he had an uphill battle
Sure.
in his fight.
Sure.
He goes to the governor, he gives the governor and his wife all these loans and
interest-free,
and Rolex watches and so forth. The governor says, I didn't do anything for Johnny Williams that I wouldn't do for anybody else. I promoted his product because he's a Virginia business. And I had a gathering at my governor's mansion to promote his product because he's a good Virginia businessman. And yes, 6 minutes after
the email
he
was
came
sent.
back on
Sure.
a golf trip,
Right.
I went to see if Virginia could help him, but I decided that we couldn't.
Right.
Is there an argument that, hey, governors do these things for Virginians all the time? I mean, that's obviously what Bob McDonnell believed.
Well, and him being the former Attorney General should be aware of the laws. Again, the issue is the disclosures. The issue is the quid pro quo, or the appearance, the mere appearance, I think is what they should have been aware of. We're going to be talking about this for a long time.
What strikes me is frankly not what happened here, but that he believed it was legal because so much of this kind of stuff is legal.
Yes.
And what do you think needs to be done in Virginia law to close that loophole?
Well, first of all, Virginia has been called the Wild West of campaign finance, raising and spending, because there are very little things that are against the law because everything's open. So in essence, it's hard to do corruption when the laws are so open.
So he could arguably win on appeal, even though the jury thought this really smelled and hit hard, frankly, against both McDonald's. He could win on appeal on the argument that, yeah, it smelled, and yeah, he gave benefits to this guy who gave him lots of money, but hey, bribery's legal.
As long as you disclose it, is the argument.
He paid me to give him taxpayer money.
Right.
Here it is, full disclosure.
It has to be in the filings, in the reports. That's where it comes down to.
Will this change Virginia culture?
I think for an election or two, but I think, as you well know, some of the heavy combated races, the competitive races, they are out of reach of the normal person to come in off the street and run for office. You have got to raise money, and you're raising money all the time. In fact, I'm surprised some of them in these competitive races actually have time to actually be in Richmond. They're typically on the phone starting in December for the next.
Give me money, give me money, give me money.
That's right. And in Virginia, we have elections every year.
Now, there are organizations, usually they're a little bit below the radar. For example, one of the most famous ones is ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange. I don't remember their title, but the council, I think it's.
That's right.
Yeah. And what they are funded by some very rich people
Absolutely.
like the Koch brothers, and they invest in state legislative elections.
Correct.
And that lets them buy state legislatures
Here's the
country.
scary part. All that legislation, it's done outside the open forum process.
They just write it up and say, here.
Bingo. And because I've given them, or I being the person who's given them $50,000, $100,000 of dollars, they're just going to promote that and say, we agree on these
and it is legal,
Oh, absolutely.
I give $100,000 to a politician and a bill. The bill says that I'm exempt from pollution standards. because
Exactly.
My
Exactly.
company pollutes all over the Potomac and rains acid rain on Alexandria, and it would cost me $2 million to clean up. I only pay you, the politician, $100,000,
Right.
and in return, you write me this bill that
You
gets
push
rid of
the
it.
bill I wrote forward.
That I wrote. I actually write the bill.
Right.
And the only thing I can't do is say what Congressman Duke Cunningham did in San Diego, where he made a price list. I write you a bill, that's $100,000.
Right.
I call the commission,
Hey,
that's
look,
50 grand.
look,
you can't make a price list, but you
Right.
can, in essence, say, here's my money, here's my bill.
So I think what people need to understand, this is not just Virginia.
Obviously.
I mean, Citizens United changed the game.
Right.
It changed the game. I think people will point to that decision, quite frankly, as the real decline of true democracy.
And yet today, the Senate had a chance to amend the Constitution
did.
to get rid of Citizens United, and on a pretty much party line vote.
That's right.
It failed.
Bingo. That's right. Why do you think that is?
Well, because
Because
big money helps the Republican Party. I mean,
Absolutely.
to put it bluntly.
Absolutely. And we Democrats, I say we because I'm a Democrat,
Sure.
We benefit as well.
Well, sure.
But I think the difference, I like to
The question is who you're beholden to.
Exactly.
Molly Ivins used to say, you got to dance with them what brung you.
That's right.
And
That's
the question is, who brung you?
That's right.
And if all of this is under the table, the other thing that I find very interesting, given that McDonald could have just disclosed this, is that the Democrats have said, all right, you want unlimited money, you want a couple Koch brothers controlling, pulling the strings on all the politicians, fine. Just disclose it.
Correct.
Just let people know there's a Disclose Act, which will require every donation to every politician
For
be
any amount.
disclosed.
For any amount.
And the Republicans have said, no, open government,
Yeah.
we're against that.
Right.
What argument other than we want secret money?
Because, quite frankly, you can start really playing some really warped games.
Right.
Through PACs, through super PACs, local, state, federal levels. I mean, it gets really, really bad. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of this isn't already being done. We just haven't exposed a lot of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like I said, it's rare they've been caught, as you said, if they
right.
simply disclosed it. The other thing I found was very interesting was just the misogynist aspect of it. I mean, here's this guy that's supposed to be all about family values, and he throws his wife to the wolves. When we come back, we're going to address the immigration question, both what President Obama has done, to what Congress can do, to what's going on right here in Fairfax County. This is Mark Levine with my guest, Cesar del Aguilar, former chair of the Democratic Party of Fairfax. We'll be right back, right after this.
I need a job.
Necesito trabajo.
I would like to speak English better.
Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
Por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
el Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
Capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals.
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
Are a small part of what we do.
son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
Para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia,
comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Hey Lena, where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease, and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, you might not know the half.
From Washington, D.C. I helped turn my town's inside scoop.
Hi, folks. This is
Our viewers want to know.
Hi, folks. This is Cesar del Aquila, former chair of the Democratic Party of Fairfax County. Welcome back to Inside Scoop. We're about to talk about immigration reform. I'm here with Mark Levine, and we're about to get into it, aren't we?
We are, and one of the reasons that I asked you, Cesar, to begin the segment is because I want to announce to all our listeners we've had a lot of Inside Scoop spin-offs. I've been very proud of all of them. We've had Inside Scoop Labor. We've had, probably our most famous is Inside Scoop Emerald Planet, the environmental show that all of you watch so much. Our first Inside Scoop spin-off was Inside Scoop Virginia, and we still have that, dealing with local issues. I'm now proud to announce a new Inside Scoop spin-off hosted by none other than Cesar del Aguilar, the former chair of the Democratic Party right here in Fairfax, Virginia, dealing with immigration issues, dealing with the Latino population, dealing with probably the fastest growing population, I would suspect, right here in Fairfax County. And I'm just glad to, all these issues in this way.
Thank you.
Every Monday night, we're going to have an expert dealing with great issues. I'll continue to do national, international topics, but immigration is probably the single issue, now that the economy is doing better, that's on the mind of voters, Cesar. And it's on, I got to tell you, there's a lot of controversy. For certainly in the Latino community, and Democrats, there's a lot of push to give the undocumented immigrants, particularly those that didn't come here of their own accord, children who lived their whole lives here since they were 4 or 5, give them a chance. Equally vehemently, maybe even more so, I don't know, there's an anti-immigrant push. They're the people on the border. They're the people complaining about people coming here and saying basically, it's like a joke, but they're taking our jobs. I mean, you've heard
their
all this.
burden, absolutely.
You've heard all this before. I assume, let's start locally. I assume right here in Fairfax County, overwhelmingly, the mood of the population is to give undocumented immigrants a chance.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, first of all, it's not just Latinos, quite frankly, that are dealing with this problem. If you look at Fairfax County, there are 104 languages spoken in the homes of public schools in Fairfax County.
Wow, 104.
So it's not just...
I don't think I could name 104 languages.
I think I can do about 30. I'm not sure I can name more than about 60. I can do about 30. But my point in that is, it's an issue that's affecting a lot of
How many people are we talking about here?
In Fairfax County or statewide?
Let's do Fairfax County.
I think I saw numbers from 10 to 15,000. That's not a lot of undocumented, and those numbers are skewed because no one really knows because
people are hiding.
Absolutely.
To be fair, they don't want to be deported. 10 to 15,000 out of a population of
about 1 million.
So we're talking maybe 1%.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
That sounds about right. But they have family here, and the family are citizens or people with green cards.
So I can tell you firsthand. I think I mentioned this to you before. I've got about 51 first cousins. One of my cousins,
give or take a few first cousins,
right, were actually affected by this. And he is now gone. He's been deported.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
You had a cousin deported? Absolutely. You, the former chair of the Democratic Party of Fairfax, still had a cousin deported.
Correct.
Well, now that brings up a whole another issue, which is
we all deal with this.
The anger that some in the community feel, the immigrant community feel towards President Obama. Yeah. I mean, he's a Democrat, he's a liberal, he talks good about immigration, he seems better than the Republicans, and yet deportations have increased from the Bush era. I mean, that's not something we talk about a lot.
Full disclosure, I'm an avid Obama supporter. I think what you're seeing that happen this weekend, quite frankly, is a political move. We've got an election coming up, and quite frankly, I think some folks in some key races kind of bent his ear a little bit.
Democrats.
Yeah, bent his ear.
Well, there's a lot of close races in the Senate, and many of them are in red states.
We may flip the Senate.
Battle Democrats.
We may flip the Senate.
North Carolina, Arkansas.
Absolutely.
There's a number of states. But let me go back, and I'm known for posing tough questions, but you can handle it. Is there palpable anger towards President Obama for not going as far as he certainly said he wanted to do? Or is most of that anger directed at the Republicans, or maybe it's both?
I think it's both. Okay. I think it's both. Quite frankly, I think if you talk to the average person, like you'd find within my family, I think they're just discusses that Washington's dysfunctional. It really has become a place where nothing gets done. I can't remember the last time something really big that we were all proud of as Americans actually got done.
Is there an argument that this should have happened in President Obama's first 2 years when we had almost 60 votes in the Senate? We even had 60 votes for 6 weeks or so. We had the House. Then it could have happened.
I think he bet on
healthcare.
Healthcare,
and there just wasn't time to do healthcare and immigration. You can't do two big things in 2 months.
No, I mean he could have went for the long ball, but he made the bet on healthcare reform.
Let me address the issues that conservatives bring up, because they do represent maybe not so much people in Fairfax County, but a large swath of people across the country. Certainly in other areas of Virginia you would see it, and even within Fairfax County among some. And that is that the economy is not as good as it should be, that immigrants often arrive and they don't have much money, they don't have much resources. And sure, we all love the Statue of Liberty and the idea, give me your tired, but many Americans don't want the tired, the poor, the huddled masses yearning to be free. They want the rich, the wealthy, the
Well, I will tell you, there's layers of, and I won't call them racist elements, but they're just prejudice. And there is a difference, in my opinion, that you have some communities that seem to have more of a perception that they are more of a strategic impact to the culture. Some doctors, engineers, and people like that, versus the day laborer coming across the Mexican border. That's just not the case with the Latino organization. We have as many people that are qualified with PhDs and masters.
There's this idea that all immigrants are poor and all immigrants are struggling.
Correct.
And that's not true.
It's absolutely not true.
Well, let me give you, for example, Fairfax County. Can you quantify how many are professionals, how many are day laborers? Is there any way to know?
Well, I mean, you can just it's represented in the actual data you see out there in the everyday working world. If you
same percentage as citizens.
Absolutely. I would say it's probably skewed a little bit more towards the service industry. Just because those tend to be jobs that folks don't need high education, high skilled labor.
But the other thing to remember is even people that come in the service industry, usually their children do much better off.
Correct.
My own great-grandparents arrived, they were the penniless ones. They were poor. In fact, I've looked at the Ellis Island Manifest. My great-grandfather had $20. That wasn't his income, that was his total wealth. Wow. That was all his assets for him and his family. Wow. So $20 100 years ago may be $200 today. It's still not a lot of money. And he worked selling clothing door to door. His wife worked at a factory, and then their children went to school and did. My grandfather actually went to medical school, had to drop off to take care of his father's business, and so forth. And the next generations do better and better. This is what used to be called the American dream.
Sure.
And what I find so interesting is that the people who are opposed to immigration really are opposed to the American dream, and the vast, vast majority of them are descendants of immigrants themselves. I don't see too many Native Americans going around complaining about immigration, although they arguably would have a right to. When a Native American complains about immigration, I say, you know what, you have a right to complain. But the 98% of us that come from descendants of slave ships or descendants of immigrants, I don't think have that right, because that was the story of our great-grandparents.
Sure. And I think some of that is certainly driven by, there seems to be a perception that if you speak Spanish, you're somehow less qualified to or entitled to the American dream.
Then if you speak German or
French
speak Hungarian, or
right? If you come from Europe and let's say you're undocumented, by the way, there are many of those people that come, and it just how they get here, or they overstay their student visas. But that seems to be more acceptable to the American dream of these people that you're mentioning.
Well, if you look at American history, the first major wave of immigrants came from Germany in the 1840s, and they were like, no, you have to speak English, you can't speak German. And then came the Irish, and a lot of that was anti-Catholic. Sure. Came the Italians, and then it was like, well, Northern Europe is okay, but not Southern Europe. Right. And then Jews, well, Christians are okay, but not Jews. Sure. And then it became a racial thing, whites but not non-whites. And what I think anyone could see in American history is it's the immigrants that actually make our economy strong, make our culture strong. It's the diversity that makes America.
That's been the history of our country.
And which makes us unique from the other countries on the planet.
But Mark, honestly, every single group that you mentioned had it tough.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
Now it's just the Latinos' turns, and it will pass.
Well, the interesting thing about Latinos is in many ways they're one of America's oldest immigrants ever since the Mexican War, 1846, when we conquered territory, obscure Mexican territory called California, Texas,
all that stuff,
New Mexico, Arizona, where Latinos had been living before we conquered, and actually
they weren't Latinos there; they were Spaniards.
They were Spaniards, or Mexicans, because that was the country.
They never spoke Latin, as far as I'm aware.
That's true. By the way, why are Latinos called Latinos?
Why is E pluribus unum Latin on the Great Seal of the United States?
One thing I find is that there are white people that use the old census term Hispanics, but most Latinos don't use the word Hispanics.
No.
They say Latinos.
We are Latino.
And I think it's maybe a way to combine all the culture as distinct from Spanish versus Mexican versus El Salvadoran.
Well, it's
Argentinian.
It's not just the language that binds, but it's the culture, it's the food, it's the music, it's everything. But yeah, we don't speak Latin in Latin America.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't think so. I thought dead quail may have thought so, but that turns out that turns out not to be true. How big is the Latino community in Fairfax?
In Fairfax, I actually did the numbers a while back. We went. I can tell you in Herndon specifically because I counted up the precincts, and it had grown over the last census by almost 100%.
In 10 years?
Yes.
It had doubled?
Yes.
And it may have even doubled in the 10 years before that?
Probably not as much. I think across the county, those numbers are up.
And are half from Mexico or more? Or?
No, funny thing, most are from like the El Salvador, some
Guatemala, Central America.
Right. And then certainly a lot of Mexicans, but then you get into the South American.
Is there some conflict between Argentinians and Mexicans and El Salvadorans as being from different culture, or Cubans, or Puerto Ricans?
Only during the World Cup, as far as I'm concerned, right? I mean, but
otherwise, once you're here, you're American.
Well, people generally stay within their country culture, but if I see people at soccer games, and it's all, we're all Latinos at that point. We all root for each other.
Fair enough. Why don't you take us out, and then we'll come back with the third segment.
Sure, absolutely. Again, this is Cesar del Aquila. Glad to be here, and I can't wait to see you folks when I start my own show coming up in a couple weeks.
The number, by the way, is 571-749-1166. Feel free to join us.
I helped turn my child's public school into a whole new kind of school. One with a curriculum that really motivates kids. One that has extended hours, 6 days a week, year-round. With loads of academic, cultural, and recreational activities. One that has support services like medical and dental right there. A school where parents' involvement is encouraged, where teachers have more time to teach, and students are excited about learning. There's just one problem. My child doesn't ever want to come home. You can help turn your school into a community school for excellence. Find out how. Call 1-877-LOVE-TO-LEARN.
It's coming. Right to your neighborhood. And when it does, you may be surprised. It's your Social Security statement of your benefits, and it's going to help you plan your financial future. Your benefit statement will tell you how much Social Security you're eligible to receive and when you'll get it. Then you'll know how much you need to save for retirement, because that's coming too. The future is in your hands. Choose to save.
The toxic fumes from this meth lab are seeping into Jamie's sinus cavity. Ammonia vapors invade her throat. Toxic gases fill her lungs. Jamie's body is deteriorating. And she doesn't even know it.
Jamie, dinner.
So, who has the drug problem now? Find out how meth affects you at drugfree.org/.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Hi, folks. Welcome back. This is Cesar del Aquila, the former chair of the Fairfax County Democratic Committee. I'll be hosting a new series of the Inside Scoop here in a few weeks, and happy to be here with Mark Levine. Mark, immigration.
And actually, the Inside Scoop, immigration, and or whatever issues Cesar decides to focus on, but I think you're starting in 2 weeks. We'll get the date in a second, but I think probably in 2 weeks, September 22nd will be his full
that's right.
First time.
Looking forward to it
as a host, which will be terrific. One thing you mentioned just before the break is I want to talk about the nature of undocumented immigrants and who they are. You mentioned some are professionals, some are. One of the things that I think Americans believe wrongly is that the vast numbers of undocumented immigrants come across our border. They talk about security of the southern border. And one of the statistics I found that's very interesting is more than 40%, almost half of all immigrants don't cross that border. They come as students and they overstay their visas. They come as tourists and they overstay their visas. They come on airplanes. They don't come across the desert. And I don't think that's something that's really ever talked about. I mean, how do we build a wall around our air to prevent all those renegade airplanes from coming in?
Yeah, that's a knee-jerk reaction, quite frankly. When I hear people talk about let's build a wall to protect our borders, well, the 9/11 hijackers didn't come across the southern border.
No.
The people that we're talking about, typically, like you said, they overstay visas, they overstay touring or visiting, and that is a huge number. In fact, until you really get serious about the policy and then enforcing it, it's going to be an issue with us for a long time.
I know of only 2 terrorist threats to the United States that came across a land border. They both came across the Canadian border.
That's right.
There was one from Vermont and one in Washington State. There was a plot, I know, to bomb Los Angeles Airport on 2000, and then I forget which the one was through Vermont. But they both came across the Canadian border, and yet I don't hear many Republicans talk about a wall against what is, after all, the largest undefended border in the world, the United States-Canadian border.
That's right.
So this isn't about security. This isn't about terrorism.
It's identifying, isolating, trying to blame a specific group, because quite frankly, a lot of people are benighted to what is actually happening, and they ignore the facts, they ignore the data, and I just think if you sit down and even put it in front of them, said here are the numbers, they would still want that wall, because somehow wall implies security.
Well, and if we had if ISIS were in Mexico, I think there could be an argument for a wall. I'm not saying that a wall is never good, but we have not had, correct me if I'm wrong, a single documented terrorist threat come across the Mexican border. We've had a couple of drug gangs that that cross borders. They also cross from Arizona to New Mexico and across state borders, but we haven't had any terrorist threat across the border.
Not that I know of.
Now, the Republicans say, though, that until we talk about security first, they're not willing to talk about immigration reform. So we have a chicken and egg problem.
Right.
Now, President Obama has said he's willing to do some security. I think that's mostly cameras, things like that.
Correct.
Border guards.
Right. More money to patrols, certainly drones, but certainly not this vast grand wall idea. I don't think.
And that's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to go through the desert.
Well, you got to get people trained, and I mean, even if some contract was awarded to build a wall, I mean, who would they get to build it? They'll probably have day laborers, quite frankly, building those walls. Mark, that's my opinion.
And of course, you can build tunnels or fences over them.
It's a uniquely American thing to do to get around a barrier.
So here's the question. When George Bush was president, and obviously many Democrats criticized George W. Bush for all number of reasons, George W. Bush supported immigration reform, and at that time, a lot of Republicans did too. John McCain famously supported immigration reform. Where are all those Republicans now? Well, there was even a vote, as I recall. 26 Republican senators voted for immigration reform that are still in the Senate today.
Mark, the Senate, the House, the country changed after President Obama was elected. I think a lot of people, that's when you saw the rise of these other
Tea
groups.
Party.
Correct. And you heard a lot of this, I want my country back sentiment. Think about that for a second. The country elected its president, and people lost their minds. They lost something. They lost their country. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't really know what's at the end of that road. But when I heard people say they lost their country and they want their country back, that to me was a different discussion. And that affected the people that ran for office, ultimately the people that were supporting those people. And that's where we are today. We're in a completely polarized Senate and House where just people don't listen and they don't want to get anything done.
But demographically, it seems to me that diversity is winning. If people...
But that's not how the districts are drawn.
Well, that's true. Gerrymandering.
Okay. Exactly. So, and for the folks that don't understand that, the census every 10 years, the result is you draw the congressional districts.
Right.
And that representation goes to Congress.
Right.
So like in Virginia, you know, you've got the dense districts packed with minorities, immigrants. Guess what? They only have a couple representatives versus the
Virginia is actually a classic case because the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general are all Democrats. Both senators are Democrats.
Correct.
And Virginia voted for President Obama both in 2012 and 2008.
Correct.
So Virginia is a blue state, or at least a majority blue state.
But not
Call
at the
it indigo
congressional,
if you like.
Not at the congressional.
It is purplish blue. It's
That's
a
right.
52, 54%.
Let's just say it's 50-50.
Or even 51. Even
Right.
51, 49 blue.
Right.
And yet 8 of the 11 congressional districts
Correct.
are red.
Yes.
And that's only because of the way they draw the district lines. And one of the things I find fascinating is across the country, because it's not just Virginia, it's Pennsylvania, it's Michigan, it's Florida, it's Ohio, is that if you just take the number of voters in 2012 who voted for Democratic members of Congress and compare it to the total number of voters who voted for Republican members of Congress, the Democrats win.
Correct.
And would actually control the House of Representatives, except for the legislative redistricting.
And the reason I bring this up, because this is key. This is who is representing a district in the House. And when you are from a district that is very, very hard to whatever side, guess what? That representative is only going to go and advocate on those beliefs and those opinions.
And the irony is that the House was, according to the founders, was supposed to be the thing that changed quickly and the thing that reflected quick public will. It was the Senate that was supposed to be the deliberative body. The House was elected every 2 years, but supposed to go hot and cold. The only way, well, I guess there's two ways. One way to rejigger the Virginia district lines to correctly reflect the views of Virginians would be to have the legislature do that. We have Terry McAuliffe is the governor. He's a Democrat. Both houses of the Virginia, now even the Senate, are controlled by Republicans, and they're not going to agree on any kind of district lines. But there is a proposal in Virginia to basically take politics out of it.
That would be the way to go.
And actually say that no matter who's in charge, because if the Democrats get power and they rejigger all the districts,
absolutely.
the Republicans will cry foul and say that's not fair.
You heard it here first. Everyone does it.
Maryland, our neighbor to the north,
everyone does it.
Democrats.
But this is what destroys the ability to get anything done.
So there is a proposal to allow judges to do it. Of course, judges can be partisan too. They're
becoming that way, aren't they?
By governors. Sure. How can we assure? I guess it's really how you make the law. How you say judges have to do it by compactness of district or things that really are non-political and have an appeals process and everything like that. Is there any hope in Virginia to gerrymander the state?
I'm going to say no.
Not in the near future.
I think what we'll have to wait is for the next census, quite frankly. And I think between now and then, you can certainly make an argument for looking at the density, as you said. A congressional representative has to have so many people, as opposed to packing a certain group, a certain cluster. Maybe we pack a whole bunch of Latinos in this district. That is what's wrong with the system.
Now, what's interesting is there were Democrats who argued 20 years ago, back in the 90s, there were some African Americans who said there was not enough African American representation. They wanted majority-minority districts, districts where they pack a lot of black people into one district. And what that does is ensures a black member of Congress, but what it does is, you've seen some of these districts in the South, North Carolina and Florida, they snake in, they snake out, they go out to the ocean for 200 miles, come back in, grab a black neighborhood, and go back. That actually harms Democrats.
I think it harms the system.
Well, it does.
You know, because I think it should just be, you have a region, it's a congressional district with so many people living in it, and you have those districts at the level. Then it doesn't matter, you know, who gets elected. They are representing that region, that number of people, and it's equal. It's what we should have.
Given the dysfunction of Congress, should President Obama go around them and say, you know what, I believe in the DREAM Act. I believe that children who are undocumented, who came here through no fault of their own, you know, if you come here when you're 3 years old, you're not making the decision to cross a border, that those kids who've lived in America all their lives maybe not even speak the language of their home country, they should have a chance. This is something Democrats believe in, we've been fighting for in legislation, the DREAM Act, but the president is considering really quite unprecedented step of going around Congress, issuing an executive order. What's your view on that?
Oh, I think like many Latinos, we were kind of hoping that would have happened by now. And I know personally, I've been affected. I'm sure a lot of families out there know that the folks that we're talking about, my cousin, he didn't know his language back home. He didn't know that.
If you don't mind my asking, how long had your cousin been in the United States? How old was he when he came here?
He was a year old.
1 year old?
He was a year old.
He came as an infant?
Yes, he was brought here.
Wow.
Yes.
And lived his entire life here.
And went to school here.
And if you don't mind, how old was he when he was deported?
21.
Wow. So he lived from age 1 to 21 in the United States of America.
He thought he was an American.
And I'm sure he barely even spoke much Spanish.
The generations lose it. He probably speaks Spanish as well as I do.
So how are we to deal with the fact that this seems an eminently just and moral thing to do, but is it a constitutional thing to do? I mean, we all want to see this act passed, but is the president acting outside the law, issuing this executive order? What's your view?
Wow, that is a huge, I think you really have to look at the way the law is structured. And I haven't looked at it to the detail to make a yes or no, he's in bounds or out of bounds. But there are things he can do by executive order. And I think a lot of folks were kind of hoping that he would have done that by now, especially with the results of this weekend's decisions.
Yeah, I think one of the ways to look at executive orders is it's simply an enforcement decision. The police don't have to arrest everyone that violates the speed limit, everyone that smokes marijuana, and he can choose not to go after these people. But unfortunately, you get a new president. Obviously, that can change. You want to go ahead and take us out?
Sure thing. Folks, again, this is Cesar del Aquila guesting here with Mark Levine, and we'll be back. And also, I can't wait to see you in a couple weeks on my own show.
Some dreams are universal. Dreams that inspire us. Multiple sclerosis is a devastating disease that changes lives forever. The National MS Society does more for people with MS than any organization in the world. But we can't do it alone. To get involved, visit us online at nationalmssociety.org. or call 1-800-FIGHT-MS. This is why we're here. Because nobody dreams of having multiple sclerosis.
What's wrong with this picture? Half of young Americans can't locate economic powers like Japan and India. 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. Without geography, our children aren't ready for the world. Geography is everywhere. It's incredible creatures, rhythm, fashion, flavor. It's economics and politics. It's change. Understanding connections between people and places is critical in the 21st century. That's why we created mywonderfulworld.org. Go there now for your free parent and teacher action kits and give our kids the power of global knowledge. Because kids who understand our world today.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine, sitting here with Cesar del Aquila, the former chair of the Fairfax County Democratic Party and the future host of Inside Scoop Immigration, one of the many spin-offs we've had from this show that I've been proud to host for almost 10 years now. Has it really been that long? I think it has been. Yeah. Wow. Man. It's been quite a while. It's a pleasure to have you, Cesar. I was really struck by your comment in the last segment about your cousin. And let me just encourage people, if you want to call in, and you don't have to agree with us, you can disagree with us, that's fine, but if you want to call in, I'm going to give out the number one last time, 571-749-1166. One of the nice things about being here on Channel 10 is we can dialogue with each other. And again, if you disagree, you're just as welcome, even whether you agree or disagree, we'll give you your chance to speak. But call in now, 571-749-1166. Cesar, your cousin, who was brought here as an infant. Yep. It's almost a classic case.
Yeah, sure.
Brought here as an infant. Clearly, that was not his decision to come here. You don't make many decisions like that when you're 1 year old. Lived here 20 years. Yep. Went to school here. Yep. Did he go to college here?
He did not. He was working.
Graduated high school. Went to work. At age 21, was deported.
Yes.
What caused him to be deported? Why him and not so many of the other 10,000 people?
Well, let's first of all, I have 51 first cousins, right? And we never agree on everything.
Okay.
So this is a tough issue for a lot of people, and relative to him, he ended up getting in some trouble with the law. Okay. And he ended up getting deported.
Okay, because that's President Obama basically said he wasn't going to deport people except those that got into.
But what he got in trouble for wasn't
minor stuff.
Yeah, you and I would consider it minor. I mean, a lot of people speed. A lot of people,
I speed. I've admitted that. The only laws that I know that I've ever broken are speeding laws and parking laws. You should see my tickets. I've got quite a few.
Well, you have to disclose those.
I fully have. But I guess my question is, these kids obviously feel American.
Absolutely.
If an American kid gets in a little trouble with the law, maybe smokes marijuana or something, they might get a fine, they might go to jail. Right. They still live here.
Correct.
When someone like your cousin was sent
back to Peru,
which is where your family is from. Yeah. And had to find some family member there to live with.
Yeah, that's what kind of tore us apart there for a little bit. I mean, it was, first of all, the news of him getting into trouble was hard enough. I mean, we pride ourselves, especially when we share names. You've got my name, you better live up to it, to the family name. But that aside, we then had to make arrangements for family that were down there that never met this guy to provide for him so he's not living under a bridge somewhere.
How's his Spanish?
Down there. It's horrible. All right? That's, he speaks English. He's American.
Oh, exactly.
So I speak a little bit of Spanish. I mean, my Spanish isn't the best, but that was tough for the family. Yeah.
How much is this going on? One of the things that seems to me is that President Obama, it's striking that Republicans complain about him in immigration because he's actually deported more people at this time than George Bush.
Correct.
And no one seemed to complain about George Bush not deporting enough people.
I don't know if the numbers correlate in terms of those being either arrested or found or discovered. I don't have those numbers, but yes, you are correct. Under the administration, President Obama has deported far more people.
What does this affect the loyalty of recent immigrants to the Democratic Party? And I mean, most citizens, new citizens, have family members that are still, well, they have a green card or undocumented or whatever. They're becoming citizens day by day. If they see the Democratic Party as being just as harsh on their families as the Republican Party, it seems to me they're likely not to vote at all.
Well, I think there's a little bit of that, but I think in general, we're certainly getting the word out in many languages, Democrats, that these are our values, and here's where we want to move the country. And I think they align well with
the only way, though, that Democrats are going to get this passed, well, there's two ways. One would be if President Obama issues the executive order, but that can go away with a new president.
Sure.
And the other way would be to basically take the House, take the Senate,
wait for the next election,
and take power. But even that's hard because of the gerrymandering we talked about. What can citizens do in the meantime to help strengthen the case, to help immigrants here to make their lives better? After all, the vast majority of us, our grandparents, ancestors were immigrants as well. What can citizens do?
Well, I think there's so many ways to deal with this. I mean, it's really a complex problem. But I think there are elders in all of these communities, not just the Latino organization, but the cultures are a little different than a traditional American family. And it's educating the elders, making sure they get the word out that it might not be the best thing to overstay your visa. It may not be the best thing to come here undocumented. That's the first thing we can do, so we don't have the large flood numbers. But there are going to be some people.
Elders back in
here.
Oh, here.
Here, absolutely.
Tell people who might come here.
Correct. Get that message out, because I think if you're encouraging people to come here undocumented, I do have an issue with that. Just because I think there are the right ways, the process should be followed.
Well, and we've just found a tremendous increase in unaccompanied minors to our borders, mostly from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, because of, let's face it, the vicious drug gangs and violence and poverty in those Central American nations.
One can understand why they want to leave.
And yet you have 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 15-year-olds riding on tops of trains, incredibly dangerous. They make it to our border. What should be done with them? Should they, because they have undergone greater suffering, perhaps, it's not only economic suffering, but some of them literally have escaped with their lives. What should be done with those people?
Again, very, very complex issue here. They could, if they know, they can declare themselves a political refugee. They could certainly seek asylum. I mean, there's lots of things they can do.
And you can seek asylum not just because you opposed a dictator, but you can get asylum because you fear violence. A drug gang tried to force you into their gang.
Right, or pick up arms at 8 years old or something. I mean, we have it, we're blessed in this country. Most children grow up in this country not knowing the horrors of a civil war or gang violence in terms of what some of these third world nations do. So I think the way to approach this, quite frankly, is for everyone to be a little more empathetic. Certainly, adhere to the laws of this country. We are a nation of laws, and people just sit down and figure out what we're going to do.
What should we do with these children? What should President Obama do?
I think, quite frankly, you let them stay. We find some means to
let them have a hearing before an immigration judge, find out the circumstances.
Take them through the process. Leaving. And if that process takes a year or two to set up, well, then we certainly have to find housing for folks. We don't want kids living on the street.
It's fascinating to me how quickly we forget. Most of us know some of our family history some far back, and we know that we came here. Most people came to America without much. Whether they came as immigrants or they came on slave ships, they didn't come with much. And yet our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our ancestors made it. And it's just fascinating to me that people always want to close the doors behind them. The English wanted to close out the Germans, they wanted to close out the Irish, and so forth, all the way to today. I guess my question is, this fear is, and some of it's a sort of a primal fear.
Very tribal.
Yeah, this is our country, and they're taking our country, and these other people are coming in, and in every other country on earth, you could sort of understand it, right? I mean, France might be less French, Germany less German, but in America, where we're from all over the world, you would think there would be a difference.
Sure.
I do want to take a call. I'm very glad to have you call in. Cindy from Fairfax, you got a couple minutes left. Tell us, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just had a question regarding what you said earlier, which is when you think about your great-grandparents that came over, they came over from Europe and other places. Now there are more weapons of mass destruction that are more easily able to kill many, many people. And so the question is really on security. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you for your question. I appreciate that. And I am very much concerned about security. The thing I think that's a false choice, though, is between the border and the airports. Because we talked about the terrorist attacks that have occurred in this country. The terrorists, the vast majority of them came on airplanes, and a couple of them came across the Canadian border.
Sure.
That doesn't mean they couldn't come across the Mexican border. Sure. But in terms of security, it would seem to me that if we had a process whereby we could check out who these people are, they weren't sneaking across borders, we allowed more legal immigrants in, we would know who these people are. We would say, I'm sorry, you belong to an Al-Qaeda front organization. Sure. We're deporting you, which we have every right to do, and you are someone just trying to make it here in America. We don't. It seems to me that, we don't want these weapons of mass destruction, obviously, to enter this country, but that's not what's happening across the world.
No, and I think this, and certainly appreciate the caller's perspective on this, but I will ask people, I challenge you to ask people, let's not confuse the folks at the 7-Eleven with the folks that attacked us on 9/11. Okay, and I think there's been this conflating view that, wow, they are different, therefore I should fear them. I think 9/11 really broke our innocence.
Didn't they all come on student visas? I think every one of them.
I don't know that for a fact.
Student visas or tourist visas?
I think they were tourists. I think they were tourists. But I mean, I think that really, punched us. And I think we're not going to recover that for a long time. Because I think what you've seen over the last decade is really this hardening fear turn into hatred.
The other thing is, she talked about weapons of mass destruction. To me, there are lots of weapons of mass destruction in America. Sure. They're easily bought at gun stores. Yeah. You go in, you buy a semi-automatic weapon, it's perfectly legal. You get a cop killer bullet and some armor.
Here in Virginia,
armor.
You can buy a bazooka.
Well, exactly right. And you can also in Arizona treat an 8-year-old to an Uzi, a fully automatic machine gun. Yeah. So because we've decided, for reasons that I disagree with, to allow these very, very dangerous weapons to be sold openly in America, what we have to do is keep out the people who would use them. And to me, the best way to do that is to look at the ideology of people that would come. And let's face it, there are not too many Mexicans or Central Americans that are coming here to overthrow the American government. No. We don't have to worry too much about them. The ones we have to worry about are people coming on planes that might profess a terrorist or ISIS mentality and so forth. Or we could actually take some of those guns and make them harder to get, which is something that we're going to have to save for another day.
Maybe we'll say it on a new show.
Absolutely. Cesar del Aquila, thank you very much for coming on.
Absolutely.
Watch Cesar at Inside Scoop Immigration. This is Mark Levine signing off.